It was a busy Saturday evening at the Riverside Lounge, the kind of place where people came to eat, laugh, and listen to live jazz after a long week. The lights were warm and golden, the tables full of couples and friends enjoying their meals. The soft hum of conversation mixed with the clinking of glasses and the slow rhythm of background music. Among the waiters moving around was a young woman in a simple black apron, her hair tied back neatly. She carried a tray full of drinks with quick but careful steps, smiling politely at customers even when her feet ached from the long shift. She had worked here for almost 2 years, and most people only knew her as the quiet waitress who never complained. What they didn't know was that once, she had dreamed of being a musician. Before working here, she had studied music for a short time, but life hadn't been kind. Bills piled up, her mother got sick, and dreams had to wait. She had left music school and taken whatever job she could find. Still, every time she walked past the small stage at the end of the restaurant, her eyes would linger on the shiny black piano sitting there under the dim light. That night, the restaurant was packed. The jazz trio that played every weekend had just started setting up: a drummer, a saxophonist, and their pianist. People came early to get good seats near the stage. The atmosphere buzzed with excitement, but then a small problem turned into a big one. The pianist, a middle-aged man who had been playing there for years, suddenly got a call. His daughter had been in a minor accident. Nothing too serious, but he had to leave right away. He apologized to the owner and the other musicians, packed his sheet music, and rushed out. The owner stood near the counter, scratching his head. The band couldn't play without a pianist, and the crowd expected music. The saxophonist looked worried. He couldn't perform the set alone. "Anyone here play piano?" The owner called out half-jokingly to his staff, trying to lighten the mood. A few waiters laughed. The young waitress, standing behind the counter polishing glasses, froze. Her hand stopped moving. "Play piano." The words echoed in her mind like a forgotten melody. She looked at the stage, then back at her tray. Her heart beat faster. Should she say something? She hadn't performed in years. She hadn't even touched a real piano since leaving school. But somewhere deep inside, the spark was still there. Small, hidden, but alive. She hesitated. The owner was about to tell the band to take a break while he figured something out. And then, before she could stop herself, she spoke. I can play," she said quietly. The room didn't go silent, but a few nearby waiters turned toward her. The owner raised an eyebrow, thinking he'd misheard. "You can what?" "I can play piano," she repeated, her voice firmer this time. There was a short pause. Then a few customers at the bar chuckled. One man said, "The waitress can play piano? That's a new one." Someone else added jokingly, "What's next when the chef's gonna sing?" Even the band members smiled politely, unsure if she was serious. The owner looked her up and down. She was wearing her uniform, hair pulled back and apron smudged with coffee stains. She didn't look like a musician, she looked like every other tired employee working for tips. "You play?" "Really?" he asked, half smiling. She nodded. "I used to. I can try if you want, just until you find someone else." The owner hesitated. He didn't want to embarrass her in front of the customers. But the truth was he had no better option. The crowd was waiting and silence wasn't good for business. He sighed. "All right then. Let's see what you got." That one line changed the energy of the entire room. As she placed her tray on the counter, the other waiters whispered among themselves. Some laughed softly. The customers who had overheard leaned forward, curious. It was the kind of unexpected thing that could either become a funny story or a disaster. She walked slowly toward the stage, her heart pounding louder than the music that had stopped playing. Every step felt heavier. The eyes of the entire restaurant seemed to follow her. Some people smirked. Others smiled, expecting a light-hearted moment. When she reached the stage, she looked small under the bright lights. The drummer gave an encouraging nod. The saxophonist looked at her uncertainly. She took a deep breath and sat down at the piano bench. Her fingers hovered above the keys. The room was filled with a strange mix of laughter and curiosity. One woman whispered, "She's actually going to play." Another said, "This should be interesting." The waitress could feel the weight of their expectations pressing down on her. But beneath the fear there was also something else, a quiet excitement. She remembered the first time she ever touched a piano, when she was a little girl and the sound felt like magic. She remembered staying up late to practice, her fingers aching but her heart full. She remembered her music teacher telling her that she had something special. All of that came rushing back now. Like a flood of memories, her palms were sweaty, and she wiped them on her apron before placing them gently on the keys. For a moment, she didn't move. She just closed her eyes and listened. Not to the crowd, not to the clinking glasses, but to the rhythm of her own heartbeat. It was strange how quiet the room had become. Even the people who had laughed earlier were watching closely now. The owner leaned on the counter, arms crossed, not sure whether to expect brilliance or a mess. Then she pressed the first key. It was soft, barely a sound. A simple note, then another, and another. At first, her hands trembled slightly. The melody stumbled as if unsure where to go. A few people at the back started whispering again. But as she played, something changed. Her body relaxed, her breathing steadied, and the music began to flow more naturally. It was as if the piano had been waiting for her all this time. The notes started to blend into each other, forming a smooth, gentle rhythm. The melody grew stronger, clearer, richer. The waitress's eyes opened slightly, and a tiny smile appeared on her face. Her fingers began to move with confidence, finding the keys like old friends. The laughter faded. The whispers stopped. One by one, people turned their heads toward the stage, realizing that what they were hearing was not a joke. The music filled the restaurant, soft at first, then powerful. The pianist in the apron was no longer a waitress. She was a storyteller, using sound instead of words. The saxophonist slowly lifted his instrument and began to play along, softly at first, matching her rhythm. The drummer followed, adding gentle brushes to the beat. The trio that had lost its pianist was now alive again, and stronger than before. For the first time in years, she felt free. Every note carried her memories, the long nights studying, the heartbreak of quitting school, the sound of her mother's laughter, the quiet tears she had shed when she thought her dream was over. Now, sitting on that stage, she wasn't just playing music, she was reclaiming it. The final note lingered in the air for a long second before fading. When the music stopped, there was complete silence, and then, as if someone had flipped a switch, the room erupted into applause. People stood up, clapping and cheering. The same faces that had laughed earlier now looked amazed. A few even whistled and shouted, "Bravo!" The waitress stood slowly, her hands trembling again, but this time from joy. She gave a small nod, her eyes shining. The owner stared at her, speechless, then smiled proudly. The band members grinned. In that single moment, everything changed. She wasn't just the quiet girl serving drinks anymore. She was the pianist who had turned laughter into applause. And though she didn't know it yet, that performance would be the start of something much bigger. The sound of applause still echoed in her ears long after she stepped down from the stage. Her hands were still shaking, her heart racing faster than ever. She couldn't believe what had just happened. Just half an hour ago, she was serving drinks invisible to everyone except when they needed something. And now people were smiling at her, clapping, whispering about her talent. When she went back to the counter, the other waiters stared at her as if they were seeing her for the first time. One of them grinned and said, "You've been hiding this from us all along?" She laughed nervously and shrugged. "I just used to play a little, that's all." But everyone knew it wasn't just a little. What she had done up there had silenced an entire room. The restaurant owner walked over, still half in shock but smiling proudly. "You saved the night," he said, patting her shoulder. "If you hadn't played, we'd have had to refund half the tables. You've got some real talent, kid." She smiled shyly, feeling her face warm. Compliments made her uncomfortable. She wasn't used to being the center of attention. "Thank you," she said softly. "I just didn't want the night to go bad." The owner looked at her thoughtfully, as if seeing a side of her he had never noticed before. "Well, you did more than save it," he said. "You gave people a show they won't forget." Then, with a half smile, he added, "Maybe you should be up there more often." Her chest tightened a little. "Oh, I don't know about that," she said quickly. "I haven't played for years. I just got lucky tonight." But deep down she knew it wasn't luck. It was the thing she had always loved most, the thing she had tried to bury when life got too hard. Later that night, when the crowd had thinned and the lights had dimmed, she found herself sitting alone at the now empty piano. The sound of clinking dishes came faintly from the kitchen, but otherwise the room was quiet. She touched the keys again, gently, as if afraid the magic would disappear if she pressed too hard. Her reflection in the glossy surface of the piano looked different now. Not because her face had changed, but because there was something new, or maybe something old, shining in her eyes. As she sat there, she remembered the way the crowd had laughed when she first walked up. That sound had stung. It reminded her of all the times people hadn't believed in her, when her classmates told her she wasn't good enough, when her relatives said music was a waste of time, when even she had stopped believing in herself. But tonight she had proved something, not just to them, but to herself. The next few days, everyone at the restaurant talked about what had happened. Regular customers came in asking about the waitress who played the piano. Some even requested songs, hoping she'd perform again. The owner joked, "Looks like you're our new star," she laughed, shaking her head. "I'm just a waitress." But her co-workers teased her in good fun. Yeah, a waitress with magic fingers. It felt strange, good but strange, and to suddenly be noticed. People who used to pass by her without a word now smiled and asked about her music. She felt lighter somehow, like the heavy weight of routine had lifted, even just a little. Still, a small part of her was afraid. What if it was just a one-time thing? What if she could never play like that again? The thought made her uneasy. A few days later, the owner called her to his office during her break. She wiped her hands on her apron nervously before stepping inside. He gestured for her to sit. "I've been thinking," he said. "The crowd loved you. You've got something special, real talent. How would you feel about playing for us every weekend?" She blinked, unsure she'd heard right. "You mean like, perform?" He nodded. "Yeah, we'll pay you, of course. You can do short sets between serving. Nothing too fancy, just you and the piano. People love live music. And honestly, I think you'd bring in more customers." For a moment, she didn't know what to say. Her heart leapt, but fear quickly followed. "I don't know," she said hesitantly. "It's been years since I played seriously. What if I mess up?" The owner smiled. "You didn't mess up last time, did you? You've already proved yourself." She thought about that night. The laughter, the nerves, the applause. Maybe this was her second chance. The one she thought would never come again. After a long pause, she nodded slowly. "All right," she said quietly. "I'll do it," the owner grinned. "That's what I like to hear." That night, as she walked home through the cool air, her mind was full of thoughts. She passed by the dark windows of closed shops, her reflection flickering in the glass. The streets were quiet except for the hum of distant traffic. She imagined what it would be like to perform regularly, to actually share her music again, not just hide it. She reached her small apartment, kicked off her shoes, and sat on the edge of her bed. Her old keyboard sat in the corner, covered with a thin layer of dust. She hadn't touched it in months. Without thinking, she stood up, plugged it in, and pressed a few keys. The sound was weak compared to the grand piano at the restaurant, but it still felt familiar, comforting. She began to play softly, letting her fingers move without overthinking. The melody that came out wasn't perfect, but it was hers. And for the first time in years, she didn't care about perfection. She cared about feeling. Hours passed without her noticing. By the time she stopped, the sky outside had turned pale with dawn. Over the next week, she practiced every day after her shifts. Sometimes she stayed late at the restaurant after closing, just her and the empty room, playing quietly while the cleaning crew worked in the background. The more she played, the more she remembered who she was before life had worn her down. Friday night came again, her first official performance. The restaurant buzzed with energy. Word had spread, and people came not just for dinner but to see the waitress who could play like a pro. She tried to stay calm as she took orders and served tables, pretending it was just another night. But her heart beat faster every time she looked at the piano. Finally, the owner nodded toward her from the counter. "You're up," he mouthed. She wiped her hands on her apron, took a deep breath, and walked to the stage. The chatter quieted as people noticed her. Some smiled in recognition. She sat down, feeling that same nervous energy from before, but this time she wasn't afraid. She started with a soft, familiar tune, something she had written herself long ago. The notes flowed easily, like they had been waiting for this moment. The room grew quiet again, the kind of quiet that comes when people are completely lost in the sound. Every note she played seemed to tell a story about struggle, hope, and rediscovering something precious. And as she played, she realized something important. It wasn't about proving herself anymore. It was about sharing what she loved. When the last note faded, the applause was louder than ever. She smiled, really smiled, and bowed slightly. Afterward, as she walked back to the counter, she felt lighter, freer, almost like she was walking on air. One of the customers stopped her and said, "You play with your heart." Don't ever stop. Those words stayed with her. That night, lying in bed, she couldn't sleep. Her mind replayed the moment she first stepped on stage, the laughter, the fear, and then the music. She realized how easily she could have stayed silent that night, how easily she could have let fear win. But she hadn't. And because of that one brave moment, everything had changed. She turned toward her window and smiled at the city lights outside. Somewhere deep inside, she felt something she hadn't felt in years: peace. The next few weeks felt like a dream. Every Friday and Saturday, she played at the restaurant. At first, she only did short sets, 2 or 3 songs between her usual work as a waitress. But soon, people started coming in just to hear her. Some customers called ahead to reserve tables near the stage. Others brought friends, saying, "You have to hear her play." The owner noticed the difference right away. More customers, bigger tips, happier faces, and for her, it was something more than just applause or money. It was a feeling she couldn't describe, something deep, warm, and full of life. Every time her fingers touched the piano keys, it felt like she was speaking without words. The music wasn't perfect. Sometimes she hit a wrong note, or her rhythm slipped, but no one seemed to care. People said they could feel the emotion behind every song, and that mattered more than perfection. One evening, a man sitting near the bar approached her after her set. He was in his 50s, wearing glasses and a simple jacket. "You've got a gift," he said kindly. "Have you ever thought of recording your music?" She laughed softly. "Oh, I don't think I'm ready for that," he smiled. "You'd be surprised what you're ready for." Then he handed her a small card. "I run a small studio downtown. Nothing big, but if you ever want to try recording, come by. No pressure." She looked at the card for a long moment, then tucked it into her apron pocket. That night she couldn't stop thinking about it. Recording music. The idea felt both exciting and terrifying. A part of her wanted to go for it, to see what could happen. But another part whispered all the usual fears. "You're not good enough. You're just a waitress. Don't dream too big." Still, the thought wouldn't leave her mind. A few days later, she finally pulled out the card again. She turned it over in her hand, staring at the name of the studio printed in small letters. After a long pause, she decided to at least visit the place. When she arrived, the studio was smaller than she expected. A cozy space with faded carpets, a few microphones, and a large window separating the recording booth from the control room. The man from the restaurant greeted her warmly. "You came," he said with a smile. "I'm glad." He introduced her to his assistant, a friendly young woman who handled the sound equipment. They showed her around and explained how the recording process worked. She listened carefully, though she was nervous. When they asked if she wanted to try playing something, her first instinct was to say no. But then she thought about how far she had come already. The night she raised her hand in front of everyone, the laughter she faced, the courage she found. She nodded. "Okay," she said softly. "I'll try." She sat down at the old upright piano inside the booth. It wasn't as shiny or grand as the one at the restaurant, but the keys felt familiar under her fingers. At first, her hands shook slightly. The red recording light blinked on and her heart began to race. But then she took a deep breath and closed her eyes. The first few notes came slowly, carefully. Then the music began to flow like it always did, natural, full of emotion, telling a story only she could tell. The man and his assistant watched silently through the glass. When she finished, they looked at each other, impressed. He pressed the intercom button. "That was beautiful," he said. "You play like someone who's lived every note." She smiled shyly, her cheeks warm. "Thank you," she said. They recorded 2 more pieces that day, simple ones but full of feeling. When she heard the playback for the first time, she couldn't believe it was her. The sound filled the small room, and for a moment, she forgot to breathe. It wasn't just the music, it was the realization that maybe, just maybe, she still had a future in it. Over the next few weeks, she kept visiting the studio whenever she could, recording more songs. They weren't for sale or anything, just something for herself, something to keep. Meanwhile, at the restaurant, her reputation grew. One evening, a local reporter came by, curious about the waitress pianist everyone was talking about. He sat quietly through her performance, then asked if he could write a small piece for the city's community magazine. She hesitated, unsure, but the owner encouraged her. "You deserve to be recognized," he said. The article came out a week later, titled "From Waitress to Music Wonder." It was a short story, but heartfelt. It talked about how she had stepped up one night when no one expected it, and how her courage had turned laughter into applause. People began to recognize her outside of work. Sometimes, when she was running errands or taking the bus, someone would say, "Hey, aren't you the girl from the article?" It made her shy, but also proud. Her mother, who lived in another town, called her after reading it online. Her voice trembled with emotion. "I always knew you had it in you," she said. "I'm so proud of you, my dear." Tears filled her eyes as she listened. It had been a long time since she had heard her mother's voice filled with that kind of happiness. For the first time in years, she felt like she was finally on the right path. But success didn't make her forget where she came from. She still worked her regular shifts, served food, and smiled at customers. She stayed humble, always thanking people for listening. One night, as she was cleaning up after closing, the owner approached her again. "You know," he said, "I've had offers from other places wanting to book you. A few hotels, a lounge downtown. They've all seen the article." She blinked in surprise. "Really?" he nodded. "They want you to play there. They'll pay more than we do, too. I won't stop you, you deserve it." She thought for a moment, then smiled softly. "This place gave me my start. I'll never forget that. But maybe it's time to see what else I can do." The owner grinned. "That's the spirit. Just promise you'll come back and play for us sometimes." "Always," she said. The following weekend, she played her last regular show at the restaurant. It was an emotional night. The tables were full, and everyone knew it was her farewell performance. When she walked to the stage, people stood up and clapped before she even played a single note. She had to blink away tears before sitting down at the piano. Her final song was one she had written herself, a soft, soulful melody that spoke of beginnings, endings, and hope. The room stayed completely silent until the very last note faded. When she finished, the crowd erupted into applause. Some even shouted her name. The owner handed her a small bouquet of flowers and whispered, "Go chase your dream." She smiled, her eyes wet. "Thank you for believing in me." That night, as she walked home under the quiet streetlights, she felt a strange mix of sadness and excitement. She was leaving behind a place that had changed her life, but she was also stepping into a world she had only dreamed about. She didn't know where her path would lead. Maybe she'd play in big halls, maybe small cafes. Maybe she'd record more songs. Maybe she'd fail, but one thing she knew for sure, she wouldn't stop playing. Not again. And as the city slept, she looked up at the night sky and smiled, because somewhere between fear and courage, between laughter and applause, she had found herself again. The morning after her last show at the restaurant felt strange. She woke up to silence instead of the familiar sounds of plates clattering or people chatting. For the first time in a long while, she had nowhere to rush, no apron to wear, no tables to serve. She made herself a cup of tea and sat by the window. The sunlight spilled across the floor, and she thought about everything that had happened. The laughter that night when she walked on stage, the first song she played, the applause, and the way her life had slowly changed. It still didn't feel real. On the table beside her was a small notebook filled with song ideas. She had started writing again, scribbling down pieces of melodies, bits of lyrics, and thoughts that came to her between shifts. Now she finally had the time to work on them. That same afternoon, she went back to the small studio downtown. The man who had first invited her greeted her warmly. "I was hoping you'd come back," he said. She smiled. "I'm ready to record again. Maybe this time something of my own." He nodded. "Good. That's what real musicians do, and they tell their own stories." They spent the day recording. The first few songs were soft, simple, full of emotion. Just her and the piano. No heavy instruments, no fancy production, just raw music that came straight from her heart. By evening, the man leaned back in his chair, listening to the playback. "These are beautiful," he said. "You've got a rare gift. You don't just play. You make people feel." She smiled shyly, but inside she felt something powerful. Confidence. For the first time, she wasn't just playing for others. She was playing for herself, too. Weeks turned into months. Word about her music started to spread online. The studio uploaded a few clips of her performances, and people began sharing them. Comments poured in, strangers saying her music helped them relax, reminded them of home, or gave them hope. She read every message carefully, often with tears in her eyes. It amazed her that her music, born out of quiet nights and private dreams, was now touching people she had never met. One morning, the man from the studio called her, his voice full of excitement. "You're not going to believe this," he said. "A local radio station wants to feature your music on their weekend show. They loved your sound." She was speechless. "Are you serious?" "As serious as it gets," he said, laughing. "They want to interview you, too. Just a short talk about your journey." Her heart skipped a beat. She had never done an interview before. The thought of speaking on air made her nervous, but she agreed. The day of the interview, she sat in the small radio studio with headphones on, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The host, a kind middle-aged woman, smiled warmly. "So you started as a waitress?" she asked. "Yes," she said, smiling softly. "I worked at a restaurant for a long time. I never thought I'd perform again, but one night, things changed." The host leaned forward, interested. "What happened?" She told the story, how the pianist had to leave suddenly, how she raised her hand, how people laughed, and how she played anyway. As she spoke, her voice trembled slightly, but she didn't hold back. She told it all honestly, just as it happened. When the interview ended, the host smiled and said, "That's an incredible story. I think a lot of people will be inspired by it." And she was right. After the interview aired, everything changed again. Messages flooded in, from students, from tired workers, from people who had given up on their dreams, but felt a spark after hearing her story. Some said they cried. Others said they started practicing an old hobby again because of her. She couldn't believe it. Her simple act of courage, one small moment of bravery, had reached so many hearts. Soon, local event organizers began contacting her to perform at community concerts and charity shows. At first she hesitated, but the man from the studio encouraged her. "This is your time," he said. "You're ready." Her first big event was an outdoor concert at the city park. The stage wasn't huge, but for her it felt massive. Hundreds of people gathered, families sitting on picnic blankets, kids running around and friends laughing together. When she walked on stage, a few people recognized her from the radio story and started clapping even before she sat down. Her chest tightened with emotion. She sat at the piano, closed her eyes, and began to play. The notes rose into the evening air, soft and gentle, blending with the rustling of leaves and distant laughter. The sky turned golden and the sound carried far across the park. By the time she finished, the crowd was completely silent, the kind of silence that holds its breath. And then came the applause. Loud, warm, full of love. That night she realized that music wasn't just her dream anymore. It was her way of connecting with the world. In the months that followed, she kept performing, at local theaters, small music festivals, and even private events. Every time she stepped on stage, she remembered that first night at the restaurant, the laughter, the fear, the trembling hands, and smiled. Because that night had started everything. Despite all the new attention, she stayed humble. She still helped out at the restaurant occasionally, visiting the owner and her old co-workers. Whenever she walked in, they'd cheer, saying, "Our star is back." She'd laugh and say, "I'll always be one of you." The owner often told new employees the story, how one brave waitress changed the course of her life by taking a chance. Sometimes, younger waiters would ask her, "Weren't you scared that night?" She'd smile and reply, "Terrified, but sometimes fear means you're about to do something important." One evening, after another small concert, she sat alone backstage, tired but happy. Her phone buzzed with a new message. It was from a music producer who had seen one of her performances online. The message read, "I'd love to meet you. I think your sound deserves a wider audience." She stared at the screen, speechless. The idea of working with a real producer, someone who could take her music beyond local shows, was something she'd never imagined. It was the kind of chance she used to dream about when she was a teenager sitting at her old keyboard. After a few days of thinking and a lot of nervous pacing, she finally replied. They met at a small cafe downtown. The producer was polite, calm, and genuine. He told her that he had seen her story online and listened to her recordings. "Your music feels real," he said. People need that kind of honesty right now. They talked for hours about her goals, her fears, and what kind of music she wanted to create. He didn't promise instant fame, and she didn't expect it. But he offered her something more valuable, a chance to keep growing. By the time she left the cafe, her heart was full. She knew she was standing at another turning point. That night, she sat at her piano at home and played quietly to herself. The city outside was calm, the air cool. She thought about everything she had learned. How courage doesn't mean not being scared but acting despite the fear. How dreams can sleep for years and still wake up. How one moment can change everything. Her fingers moved softly across the keys, creating a melody she had never played before. Gentle, hopeful, alive. She wasn't the same person who once served food in silence. She wasn't the waitress who doubted herself. She was a musician, not because she was famous or rich, but because she had found her voice. And as the last note faded into the night, she whispered to herself, "This is just the beginning." Months passed and life moved faster than she had ever imagined. Her days were filled with practice, rehearsals, recordings, and meetings. Sometimes it all felt like a dream she hadn't quite woken up from. The producer who had reached out kept his promise. He helped her record her first proper album, a collection of songs inspired by her own journey. Every track had a piece of her story in it. The struggles, the small victories, the nights she spent doubting herself, and the moment she found her courage again. They recorded in a slightly bigger studio this time, with real equipment and sound engineers who treated her like a true artist. At first she felt out of place among them, unsure if she belonged. But as soon as her hands touched the piano keys, all the noise in her head disappeared. The first time she heard one of her finished songs through the studio speakers, she couldn't stop smiling. It was surreal. The music sounded richer, fuller, more alive. Yet underneath all the layers of sound, it still had her heart in it. When the album was released online, she didn't expect much. She thought maybe a few local listeners would find it. But within days, the songs started spreading. People shared them on social media, tagging her, saying how the music made them feel calm or inspired. Some said they listened to her piano melodies every night before sleeping. She read each comment with gratitude. She never responded with big words, just small, honest ones. "Thank you for listening," she would reply. One afternoon, while sitting in the studio, her producer came in with a bright smile. "Guess what?" he said. "Your album just crossed 100,000 plays online." Her eyes widened. "What, really?" He nodded, grinning. "People love it. You're reaching hearts everywhere." She covered her mouth with her hands, tears forming in her eyes. 100,000, it sounded unreal. For someone who used to be laughed at for walking on stage, this felt like magic. Not long after, she received an invitation to perform at a music festival in another city. It was a big event. Several artists, hundreds of people in the audience, and cameras capturing everything. When she got the email, her heart raced. Part of her was thrilled, but another part whispered old doubts again. What if I'm not good enough for such a big stage? What if I freeze? But she had learned something important along her journey. Fear doesn't mean stop. Fear often means you're about to do something meaningful. So she said yes. The night of the festival came. She stood backstage, surrounded by bright lights, cables, and people rushing around. She could hear the noise of the crowd outside and the laughter, the cheers, the sound of thousands waiting. She took a deep breath and reminded herself where she started. A restaurant, a borrowed piano, a moment of courage. When her name was called, she stepped into the spotlight. The stage lights blinded her for a second, but as her eyes adjusted, she saw the massive audience stretching out in front of her. It was overwhelming, but beautiful. She sat down at the piano, placed her hands gently on the keys, and let out a slow breath. Then she began to play. The first notes drifted through the air, soft and clear. The sound filled the space, flowing over the crowd like a warm wave. People grew quiet, listening closely. Her fingers moved gracefully, every motion full of emotion. The music rose and fell like the rhythm of life itself. Tender one moment, powerful the next. It wasn't just a performance. It was a story told through sound, and the audience felt it. As she played, she thought about everything she'd been through. The laughter that once hurt. The late nights of practice. The quiet tears when she doubted herself. The kindness of those who believed in her. Each note carried a memory. Each chord felt like a thank you to everyone who had been part of her journey. When the last note faded into silence, she slowly lifted her hands off the keys. For a heartbeat, there was nothing, no sound, no movement. Then the entire hall erupted into applause. The cheers were loud, genuine, filled with emotion. Some people stood up, clapping and shouting her name. Cameras flashed, and the lights seemed to shine even brighter. She smiled through her tears. That moment, that applause, wasn't about fame. It was about the journey that brought her there. After the show, people came to meet her. Some wanted autographs, others just wanted to say thank you. One young girl, maybe 10 or 11, came up shyly holding a small notebook. "I want to learn piano too," the girl said softly. "But I'm scared people will laugh at me." The pianist bent down, smiling warmly. "They might," she said gently. "But play anyway. Because one day they'll stop laughing and then they'll listen." The girl smiled back, her eyes shining, and ran to her parents. That night, as she sat in her hotel room, she looked out at the city lights and thought about how far she'd come. It hadn't been an easy path. There were still struggles, sleepless nights, long hours, moments of doubt. But every bit of it had led her here. She realized something important. Success wasn't about fame or numbers. It was about courage. The courage to begin when everyone doubts you. The courage to keep going when no one's watching. And the courage to believe in yourself when it's hardest. Months later, she returned to her old restaurant for a visit. The owner was still there, smiling proudly when he saw her. The piano still sat in the corner, shining under the same soft lights. "Still remember this old thing?" he said, tapping the piano gently. She smiled, running her fingers over the keys. "How could I forget?" Everything started here. The customers that night recognized her, and soon a small crowd gathered, asking her to play just one song. She laughed and agreed. Sitting down once more at the familiar piano, she began to play, the same melody she had played that first night when everyone laughed. But this time, no one laughed. The restaurant grew quiet, just like before, and every face turned toward her, full of admiration, not doubt. When the song ended, the applause was warm and full of love. The owner leaned close and said softly, "You see? You've become a legend." She smiled, her eyes soft. "No," she said. "I just stopped being afraid." When she left that night, the air outside was cool and calm. She walked slowly, listening to the quiet hum of the city, her heart at peace. She had gone from being a shy waitress who almost didn't raise her hand, to a musician who had touched thousands of hearts, and yet, she was still the same person, humble, grateful, and deeply human. As she reached her home, she looked up at the night sky and whispered to herself, "Thank you for that one moment of courage," because she knew that sometimes one small act, one brave decision, could change an entire life, and hers had changed forever.